Assalamualaikum. Assalamualaikum everyone. The course we're going to study is Human Biochemistry and Diseases. In today's lecture, we will study about vitamin B12. So at the end of this lecture, you will be able to understand what is vitamin B12, its dietary sources, how it is being absorbed and digested in body, as well as its various functions. So vitamin B12 is a water-soluble vitamin, which means that it is soluble in water. It is found in naturally occurring foods, in fortified foods, and in dietary supplements. Vitamin B12 has many forms, and due to presence of cobalt as a central atom, it is known as cobalamin. As you can see in the figure, that this is the structure of vitamin B12, in which cobalt Cu+ is a central atom. This cobalt is an integral part of vitamin B12, and it is essential for proper functioning of cell, which is involved in production of red blood cells. Okay. It is also involved in production of antiviral and antibacterial components. This cobalt, that is central atom in the vitamin B12, also known as cobalamin, is responsible for antibacterial as well as antiviral components. So these antibacterial and antiviral components prevents the body from further infections. So there are two forms of vitamin B12. Okay, one is methylcobalamin and the other one is 5-deoxyadenosylcobalamin. Okay, so methylcobalamin is important for brain and nerves, and as well as for production of RBCs, whereas this 5-deoxyadenosylcobalamin is really important for an enzyme. So this enzyme actually catalyzes the conversion of L-methylmalonyl-CoA to succinyl-CoA. So these two, methylcobalamin and 5-deoxyadenosylcobalamin, have an active role in human metabolism. It is also related in cyanocobalamin form. However, the biological active forms are three, which are methylcobalamin, adenosylcobalamin, and hydroxycobalamin. Okay? So as I've told you that this methylcobalamin is important for brain and nerves as well as the production of RBCs. Okay, this adenosylcobalamin has involved in metabolism of fats and amino acids. Okay, so this adenosylcobalamin is involved in metabolism of fats and amino acids, and as well as the production of myelin sheath. So this myelin sheath is actually surrounded by nerve cells whose function is to protect the nerve cells. Okay, so the role of adenosylcobalamin is in the metabolism of fats and amino acids, as well as it is involved in formation of myelin sheath, which protects the neuron. Whereas hydroxycobalamin, it is used to treat vitamin B12 deficiency, and it is used, so it uses fats and carbohydrates for energy and make new proteins. Okay, hydroxycobalamin uses fats and carbohydrates which are already present in a body, and use them to make energy and as well as new proteins. Vitamin B12 is found in tissues and in serum of human and higher animals. Sources of vitamin B12. So vitamin B12 is present naturally in animal foods and as well as being added to fortified foods. However, plant food lack vitamin B12. Okay, so the plants does not contain vitamin B12. They lack vitamin B12, whereas animal derived food are rich in vitamin B12. Okay, so the best source of vitamin B12 is beef liver and clams, meat, poultry, fish, milk, and other dairy products. Nutritional yeast, breakfast cereals, and fortified food products also have vitamin B12. There are two terms that we use. One is vegan and other is vegetarian. Okay? So the main difference between vegan and vegetarian is that vegan are those individuals that strictly avoid all animal source food. Means that the individual who does not consume and all the food that is being derived from animal, like it does not consume milk, egg, meat, yogurt, cheese, anything that is derived from animal. Is the person who strictly avoid it is called as vegan. Whereas vegetarian, they only avoid meat, okay, but they may eat other animal derived products like dairy and eggs. So as the primary source of vitamin B12 is animal derived food, so both vegans and vegetarians are at high risk of developing vitamin B12 deficiencies because the rich source of vitamin B12 is meat. So the vegans also avoid meat, vegetarians also avoid meat. So they both are at risk of developing vitamin B12 deficiency. Okay? But as I told you that vegans strictly avoid all the animal source food including milk, eggs, and meat, so they are easily prone to vitamin B12 deficiency. Whereas vegetarian, they do not consume meat, but still they are consuming other animal derived products like dairy products and eggs. Okay, so they might fulfill the deficiency of vitamin B12 to some extent by consuming other dairy products. So how vegetarians overcome the deficiency of vitamin B12? Okay. The dietary requirement for vitamin B12 of vegetarian is that they consume low-fat milk, yogurt. As I told you, the vegetarians only avoid meat, so they can eat all other food except meat. Okay, so then they can consume cheese, nutritional yeast, fortified plant-based milk, in which nutrients has been added, vitamin B12 has been added. The famous is soy milk, okay, and the fortified cereals. How vegans take vitamin B12. So vegans mainly have to depend on fortified food like on supplements as well as nutritional yeast and some breakfast cereals that are plant based. So food which are fortified with vitamin B12 consumed by vegans are breakfast cereal, fortified non-dairy milk, and vegan spreads. Microbial flora. So the interesting thing is that the vitamin B12 is being produced, it is being synthesized by some bacteria in animals and other humans. But unfortunately, this vitamin B12 has no use in the body. Okay? Why? Because it is not be able to absorb in the body. As vitamin B12 is synthesized by some bacteria of microbial flora in humans and other animals, humans, however, do not benefit from this source as it is not available for absorption. Why it is not available for absorption, I'm going to tell you. So, as I've told you that the gut flora are actually the good microorganisms, good bacteria that are present in our gut, that are present in large intestine. Okay, so the microorganism which already harbors on large intestine produce vitamin B12, whereas the receptor that actually bind to vitamin B12 and aids in absorption of vitamin B12 are located in small intestine. Okay, the receptors of vitamin B12 are located in small intestine, whereas vitamin B12 is being produced by large intestine. Okay, so that's why vitamin B12 that is produced by gut flora in our body is not being able to absorb. It is useless because its receptor known as tubulin receptor, it is vitamin B12 receptor, are present in small intestine. So as I have told you that in this I have told you that vitamin B12 is being produced by some bacteria in humans as well as animals. Okay, so we might overcome the deficiency of vitamin B12 through our diet or through dietary supplements. So how does animal consume vitamin B12? Okay, how does animal overcome the deficiency of vitamin B12 that is not being absorbed in a body but it is produced in body? So mammals like rabbit, pigs, they tend to re-ingest their feces. Okay, they tend to eat their own feces. This act is known as coprophagy. And mammals like rabbits and pigs, they tend to re-ingest their feces, and the act is known as coprophagy. So while doing so, they are able to absorb vitamin B12 that is released in feces, produced by the gut flora and directly released into feces. So by eating their feces, these animals, these mammals, rabbits and pigs can actually overcome the deficiency of vitamin B12. So this act is known as coprophagy. Mammals like rabbits and pigs re-ingest their feces, an act called coprophagy, which allows them to absorb the nutrients including vitamin B12 produced by their gut flora. Okay? So vitamin B12 is present in two forms. It is present in free form and as well as it is present in bound form. Okay? So the digestion of both this free form and this bound form is totally different in your body. Okay? So first of all, we will study how this free form of vitamin B12 is being digested in your body. So I want to tell you that the free form of vitamin B12 is provided by supplements. So only in supplement vitamin B12 is already in free form. How it is digested, we're going to study it. So this is vitamin B12, okay, and its carrier protein that is transcovalent 1. Okay, this carrier protein is also known as R binder or haptocorin. R binder or haptocorin. HAPPOCORIN. Okay, so this is vitamin B12 and this is its carrier protein that is transcovalent 1 receptor. Carrier protein means that it will transfer, it will take the vitamin B12 from one part of the body to the other part of the body for being able to digest. So this carrier protein is being produced by salivary glands present in the mouth. Okay, so these carrier proteins that is transcovalent 1 has been secreted. It is being produced by our salivary glands present in the mouth as well as the mucosal cell of stomach. Mucosal cell of stomach also secrete this receptor. This carrier protein is known as transcovalent 1. So once the vitamin B12 is being consumed via supplements which is already present in free form, so in mouth, as we know that in mouth and in stomach, vitamin B12 has its carrier protein. So note that this complex will remain bound to each other. Vitamin B12 will remain bound to each other unless or until it enters into intestine, into duodenum part of intestine. So when this complex, that is vitamin B12 and transcovalent 1 complex, when it reaches the duodenum part of intestine, of small intestine, then vitamin B12 will be free, will be released from this receptor, and then vitamin B12 will be easily absorbed by a enterocyte that is present in the small intestine. Okay? So this is how the free vitamin B12 that is present in supplements is being digested by our body. That is the bind to its carrier protein, which is being produced by our stomach and salivary glands. And these complex will remain bound to each other, will remain bounded unless or until it enters into small intestine. And in small intestine, with this actually vitamin B12 will be released from its complex and then it will be easily absorbed. Now, how bound vitamin B12 undergo digestion? First of all, we'll take a look at what does bound vitamin B12 is. This is food particle. Okay. The purple part is protein, and the red part, the red dots are vitamin B12. So, a food contains protein, and inside the protein, vitamin B12 is attached. So this vitamin B12 that is being attached to the protein, okay, and the protein which is present in the food, so this vitamin B12 is known as bound vitamin B12. Okay. Then how does our body digest this bound vitamin B12? First of all, in mouth, there is a partial digestion of food matrix. So in mouth, the salivary glands or saliva will release salivary amylase enzyme that will actually partially digest the food matrix, the food particle. Okay, whereas the remaining partially digested food that contain food particle, bound protein, and vitamin B12 will enter into stomach. Okay, so once this partially digested food enters into stomach, it will stimulate. It will do two things. Okay, it's one, and this is other pathway. So first of all, what it does that it will stimulate the chief cells of stomach to release pepsinogen. Okay, this partially digested food when it enters into stomach, it will stimulate the chief cells of stomach to secrete pepsinogen. This pepsinogen is in inactive form. Okay, so this pepsinogen is in inactive form. So, so for this pepsinogen, if it have to perform its role, it must be converted into active form. Okay. So the other step is that once partially digested food enters into stomach, other cells known as parietal cells, which are present in fundus region of stomach, will release HCl, that is hydrochloric acid. This HCl will actually convert the secreted inactive form of pepsinogen, which is being secreted by chief cells in stomach, into active form pepsin. So once this pepsin, pepsinogen is converted into pepsin, that is active form, then it will actually cleave the protein part of food. Okay, protein part of partially digested food. So this protein part of partially digested food will be cleaved by pepsin, activated pepsin. So this process is known as proteolytic cleavage. Okay. After the proteolytic cleavage, that as I told you that the food is being absorbed, is partially digestion of food occurs in mouth as well as stomach. The protein will be totally digested by proteolytic cleavage in the stomach by pepsin. So vitamin B12 will be now free. Okay, this vitamin B12 will be now free, and then this vitamin B12 need a carrier protein to transfer it from stomach to intestine where it is going to be absorbed. So free vitamin B12 will actually bind to transcobalamin 1 receptor that we have just discussed. It is also known as R binder or heptocolin. Okay. Then once this vitamin B12 binds to transcobalamin 1, it will produce a complex known as vitamin B12 and transcobalamin 1 complex. This complex will remain bound, this vitamin B12 will remain bound to its carrier protein, that is with transcobalamin 1, unless or until it enters into small intestine, that is the duodenum part of the intestine, from where this vitamin B12 will be released from its carrier protein and being absorbed. Okay. So in bound vitamin B12 is that vitamin B12 is bound to the protein part and the food. In the mouth, the food is partially digested, and that's partially digested food that contains food particle, protein, and vitamin B12. But in the stomach will release chief cells which will secrete inactive pepsinogen. So this inactive pepsinogen must be converted into active form. So the parietal cells in the fundus region of stomach will release HCl. That HCl will convert pepsinogen that is inactive form to pepsin. That pepsin will cleave the protein part of the food, and the process known as proteolytic cleavage, which will free the vitamin B12 from it, this complex. Okay, then with this vitamin B12, then they bind to its carrier protein, that is transcobalamin 1, and in the small intestine, this will be released from it and will further absorbed in the body. Okay. So how does absorption of vitamin B12 occurs? Okay. So as I've told you that the parietal cell in stomach will release HCl, okay, that will convert pepsinogen to pepsin, which will then undergo the proteolytic cleavage and will release the protein from its will release the vitamin B12 from its protein part. Okay. The brighter cell in stomach will also release a factor known as intrinsic factor IF. So as vitamin B12 remain bound to transcovalent 1 receptor carrier protein, and it will bond a complex that is vitamin B12 transcovalent 1, and it will only be released when this complex reaches duodenum part. So IF in the stomach cannot bind to vitamin B12. Why? Because vitamin B12 is already bonded to this carrier protein. So with this complex, IF will also enter into duodenum. So both IF and this complex known as vitamin B12 and transcopylamine 1 complex will enter into duodenum. So what happens in duodenum? When this complex and IF enters in duodenum, the pancreas will release protease enzyme in the duodenum. Okay, then pancreas will release protease enzyme in the duodenum. This protease enzyme will actually freeze this transcopylamine 1 carrier protein from vitamin B12. Okay, this protease enzyme that it will release the transcopylamine 1 carrier protein, and it will free the vitamin B12. So vitamin B12 is now free. It is not bonded to any receptor protein, any carrier protein. And then IF, intrinsic factor, okay, will then bind to vitamin B12 that is free in form, and it will form vitamin B12 IF complex. And then this complex, this vitamin B12 and IF will enter into the stomach where absorption occurs. Okay. So how in stomach this vitamin B12 is absorbed? So in ileum part, in ileum. Okay. So in ileum part, vitamin B12, as I told you, is bound to intrinsic factor now. So in ileum, through receptor-mediated endocytosis, it will enter into cell, and vitamin B12 will bind to its receptor known as tubulin receptors, which are present in the enterocyte in the ileum part. So in the enterocyte, tubulin receptors are present. In the ileum, vitamin B12 and intrinsic factor complex is present. Okay, then the vitamin B12 will be released from intrinsic factor and will bind to its tubulin receptor, and absorption will take place. Once vitamin B12 is being absorbed in ileum part, then it has to be transported to other part of the body, okay, for the further absorption. So this vitamin B12 is now bound to another carrier protein known as transcopylamine 2. So this was transcopylamine 1 that was released by salivary glands in mouth and as well as in mucosal cells in stomach. But this transcopylamine 2 is present in ileum. So this transcopylamine 2 will bind to vitamin B12 so that it can further absorb in other part of the body. So this 50% of absorption of vitamin B12 will take place in liver, whereas the remaining 50% will take place in tissues. So in tissues, this vitamin B12 and IF complex will obviously dissociate. This complex will be dissociated by a set of some enzymes. Like for now, consider that somehow vitamin B12 is being dissociated, is released from this IF complex, and then vitamin B12 will now is free. It is not bound to any complex. It is not bound to any carrier protein. So this free vitamin B12 can actually enter into blood system, can enter into blood and have its function. So this is how absorption of vitamin B12 occurs. Like parietal cell release HCl intrinsic factor, as vitamin B12 binds to transcopylamine 1 complex, so IF cannot bind to it in the stomach. So it will go with this complex into duodenum, and in duodenum pancreas will secrete protein enzyme, and then it will free vitamin B12. B12 will bind to IF. This IF will bind to its receptor in ileum. In ileum it will undergo absorption. Once the vitamin B12 is absorbed in ileum, then it will bind to another carrier protein known as transcopylamine 2, and then transcopylamine 2 will undergo absorption in the liver as well as in the tissues where this complex is dissociated, converted into free vitamin B12, and this vitamin B12 will enter into blood. Okay, so this is another diagram. So this was the actual diagram, and that graphical. So this is how the absorption occurs. So consider that this is bound vitamin B12 that is present, that is bonded to protein. Okay, so in once this is consumed, salivary gland produce saliva, and will release R binder that I have told you that it is transcobalamin 1. Okay, this transcobalamin 1 will then bind to its protein part, and then the pepsin will gastric parietal cells, and so parietal cells in. Okay, so this is the bound vitamin B12 that is being bound with the protein part. Once this vitamin B12 present in the food enters into mouth or salivary gland, will release R beta, that is transcopalamin 1 receptor. As this receptor will not be able to bind through this, then this receptor from salivary fluid will enter into stomach. The stomach cell will also release this factor that is carried protein. Sorry, that is transcopalamin 1. And when this bound vitamin B12 enter into the stomach, the parietal cells in the stomach and as well as mucosal cells will release pepsin. Pepsin will undergo the cleavage of protein part and it will free this B12. This B12 will then bind to this transcobalamin 1. Moreover, as the B12 and R and B12, that is R binder transcobalamin 1 and B12 complex is formed, so intrinsic factor cannot be attached to this. So intrinsic factor cannot attach to this complex, and it will go with this R binder into the duodenum part. So once this R, that is transcobalamin 1 and B12 complex along with the intrinsic factor enters in the duodenum part, the pancreas will secrete protease enzymes. This protease enzyme will split this R, that is transcobalamin 1 and B12 complex. Okay, then the B12 will be released from this, and then this B12 will then attach to the intrinsic factor and will form IF-B12 complex. This complex will enter into ileum, and in iliac cell there are receptors, that is tubulin receptors, through which the IF bound. Okay, the IF will bound to the tubulin receptor along with the vitamin B12, and then it will undergo absorption again. It will the other carrier protein, that is transcobalamin 2 binds to the vitamin B12 and it will carry to liver and as well as tissues for further absorption so that it can enter into blood. Storage of vitamin B12. About 2 to 5 mg of vitamin B12 is stored in human body. 50% of it is stored in liver for about 1 year, while 0.1% is lost through excretion every day. So vitamin B12 which is stored in liver is sufficient for 1 year. So once the liver store 50% of vitamin B12, then in 1 year, if you are not taking vitamin B12 from your diet, then it is sufficient. Okay, the body can survive for 1 year. But after 1 year, the person does not consume vitamin B12, then he or she is at risk of developing a deficiency. Okay, that is vitamin B12 deficiency. So what are functions of vitamin B12? So vitamin B12 is crucial for formation of red blood cells. It is important for synthesis of DNA, for normal functioning of neurons, as well as certain metabolic reactions. Certain metabolic reactions to occur, vitamin B12 acts. Uh, so how vitamin B12 acts as cofactor and vitamin B12 deficiency will be discussed in next lecture.